welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us again on a Friday evening for Voyage Fromage. For those of you, because I'm not sure exactly who's here, and I recognize Suzanne's name. I didn't see the other names, I'm sorry. But and I know that we've done Comté before. So in this little session today, I've said this before, but today I really mean it. We're going to do things a little bit different. So we have 4 Comté with us today, and just as a preference, we're not going to do just a linear tasting. In other words, we won't sit here and talk about each one. So I'm going to give you some introduction, but I kind of want you guys to start eating as we go, and we'll talk about them. We'll talk about each expression of Comté that we're tasting, the age, etc. But I think that this is a good opportunity and a good time to talk a little about the history of Comté, about what it means for us as Formaggio Kitchen, our relationship with Marcel Petite, the people we buy it from, etc., all that sort of thing. So eating on this is just part of the whole experience. When you do taste it, please keep in mind the order. We have 4 Comté with us. We have, Morgan,
they actually have 5.
Oh, you know what? I'm missing the gourmandise. So I apologize, everybody. I'm missing one of them. So the order that you want to eat these in is the elegance will be first, the gourmandise is second, Fort Saint Antoine or FSA is third, Le Fort is fourth, and the 5th one is the Grand Cru. So by all means, at any point, please start eating, enjoy it, and don't hesitate. Any questions, any comments on these, at any point, just buzz in, chime in, and we'll do it. If you're enjoying beverages, please obviously do. Tonight, I'm doing something a little odd with the tasting for us, is that I'm drinking whiskey, because Comté, to me, Comté is sort of a side note here, but easy to pair with so many beverages. Beer, it's great with white wine, red wine, dessert wine, oxidized, sparkling, and whiskey, which I like, is an easy pouring, or is a very easy tasting for that. So whatever you guys are enjoying with it, I know it'll work. Obviously, there's better and there's worse pairings with those, but it'll be good. So once again, any questions, and when we do talk about, if you want to talk about specific cheeses we're tasting, by all means, go right ahead. Just chime in. I am having just another side note for me personally. If something comes on the screen and I don't see it right away, forgive me. I just had eye surgery, so everything's a little bit blurry. So forgive me on that. Anyway, let's talk
Dave,
about.
I'm going to interrupt you real fast. No. I'm going to put in the chat the tasting order for the people that just joined. It was Elegance, Gourmandise, FSA, Le Fort, and Grand Cru.
Correct. That's the order.
Thanks.
All right. And once again, everybody, just start eating. Enjoy these. Do not hesitate. This is about tasting. So cheers, salute, and we'll start. So Comté, and if you want to, impress your friends and try to sound more correct, the spelling is Comte. The way you actually pronounce this, the M becomes an N, and it is Comté. So again, you want to impress your friends, you can say it correctly. Otherwise, Comté is fine. That's the way we always say it. It's easier. Just don't say Comte. That's all I ask. In any case, Comté is a really interesting cheese for so many reasons. For me personally, I would say this is the one cheese that I could not live without. If I was stranded on a desert island, this is it. It's perfect when it's young, when it's old, it melts well. It's good with almost any foods. It's great on its own. It pairs with things. There's always some of this in my refrigerator, and it's the easiest cheese to just have, enjoy. So I love it. It's perfect in so many ways. But unlike a lot of cheeses in France, we tend to think that cheese in France is always old, and Comté is an old cheese. It was they first started making Comté over 1,000 years ago, except that what it was and what it is now are sort of two different things. The way Comté is made now is a sort of a little system that everybody in the area in the Jura, which if you're not familiar, the Jura is basically east and central France, very close to the Swiss border. It's like an hour and a half north of Lake Geneva, just sort of north of the Savoy Alps, and sort of tell by that picture, but it very much looks like Vermont. So in the Jura in France, there are villages. There are what they call the mountains, although the area is not very tall. I think the tallest peak is around 1,000 meters, 1,100 meters. So it's not super tall, but it's still very hilly. But in this area, there are villages and small towns and a lot of farmland. So the way Comté is made, and this is symbiotic and everybody is connected, is that you have a village, and in this village there is what is called a fruitière. Fruitière, which means the fruits, is a building where cheese is made. Now, farmland stretching up, I believe it's about 15 to 20 kilometers radius from that fruitière. All the farmers, there's different farmers who are all around this, all breeding the same cows, mostly Montbéliard with some Simmental, which is 5% at most. Anyway, everybody's raising their cows. That is a Montbéliard cow. So everybody has their cows in pastures, and twice a day, these cows are milked, and the milk is pooled into, or somebody goes and collects all the milk, goes into a vat, it gets collected, then all that milk goes to the fruitière. The fruitière then makes the cheese. He ages the cheese for about 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the size of their cave. And at that point, then the cheese is transferred to an affineur. But for all of this to work, everybody has to be in line. So for the fruitière, for the cheesemaker to make good Comté, the milk has to be in pristine condition. It has to be perfect. So during most of the year, all of these cows are outside. They are never fed silage. It's banned outright. They're feeding on grass. Basically from starting in April when the snows go away up until anywhere between end of September, October, depending on what's happening with snowfall and grass, and if it starts to dry out. If it starts getting dry, they pull them in. And then when they're inside the barn, they're eating hay the entire time. And all of the hay is local. Every farmer is collecting their own hay. So essentially it's all together. You can use antibiotics if a cow is sick, but those cows are generally taken out of circulation, so you don't get cows with hormones. There's no, it's all very clean, works very well. So this system of the fruitière, the farmers pooling their milk, going to the fruitière, then the fruitière aging it and then moving it to an affineur who finishes the aging and then distributes it, is a system that started about 1,000 years ago. I believe it's 1153 in a small village in the Jura. And this was a time when obviously it was horse and carriage. That's how you got things from one place to another. And cheesemakers were having a difficult time essentially collecting enough milk. They were struggling. You know, if you had a bad winter, this was before people started drying hay and feeding and milking the cows for cheese during the wintertime. So they were having a difficult time making enough cheese. So in a small village, they decided a cheesemaker basically started talking to all his friends, and they decided to start pooling the milk. One person would make it so that then they could start selling and distributing. That idea sort of took hold and slowly started taking root all throughout the Jura. Eventually, it sort of stemmed, it flowed its way into Switzerland, in Gruyere as well. Never really made it elsewhere out of this. There are people who pool milk in other parts of France, but not quite to this system. Eventually, it sort of became a little codified. People became, for lack of a better word, militant about this, where, you know, the people collecting milk, it became a little more rigid. And there are some farmers who rebelled a little bit. They would hold out some milk, not give it to them. That's where the cheese Morbier was born out of. Or if there was a problem, if it was rainy, there was too muddy, the carriages couldn't come, so people had milk. So there always a problem, but this is the best solution that worked. And today we still do it. Now, Comté is made, like I said, they milk the cows twice a day. Comté is made 365 days a year, once or twice a day, usually twice, because the animals are being milked twice, and most cheesemakers want to make Comté immediately. There are a few smaller producers who don't have enough milk to make large batches, and so they'll make it once a day. They'll let the milk sit overnight, but that's few and far between. For the most part, it is made twice a day. Now, fruitières can be large and small. The smallest ones make about 6 wheels a batch. The largest ones make about 200 plus in a batch, or sorry, in a day, or in one milking. So based on that, you can tell obviously there's different sizes. So each Comté is going to be different. Now, as not a side note here, Comté is made only in the Jura area, and the hills, what you're looking at right there, is one area, and then it sort of goes into the flatlands. And Comté in the flatlands is generally considered a slightly less grade than ones from mountains. It doesn't mean that all are better or worse, but for the most part, that's the case. The other thing is, it's a generally accepted rule that Comtés coming from smaller producers are producing better Comté. Not always the case. Again, I would never, a blanket statement like that is impossible and and also reckless to make. There are people who make great cheese in large scale, and there are people who make great bad cheese in small scale. So that's not always the way it is. However, there are about 197 fruitières in the Jura making cheese, and most of them are sort of mid-range, and there's small ones. So with 197 different producers making anywhere between 6 and 200 wheels a day, you can obviously tell there is a ton of Comté being made. Now, it's the most widely eaten cheese in France. It's the most widely eaten cheese in the world. And so they have actually had an issue. This is true of almost every affineur. The person who finishes this has had an issue keeping up with the demand for Comté. You won't be able to tell when you look at the caves that Morgan will show. You're going to see thousands of wheels, and it would seem like that would not be the case. However, it's true. The demand for Comté keeps going up worldwide and in France, and so the people are having a hard time keeping up. There are also, the fear of farmers who people in the Jura not wanting to become farmers, and so every now and then you might lose a producer, or they're combining forces to try to make it better, but it keeps on happening, and so we're going to be there. So there's 197 producers. We work with an affineur, and I keep saying this word. An affineur is somebody who ages cheese, and in the Jura, the affineur is the one who finishes a Comté to a minimum of 4 months. And while I've seen 5-year age Comté, it's few and far between. But they're the ones who finish it, and they're the ones who distribute it. There are only a handful of people who do all of that together. Most people, most fruitières don't want the hassle of aging and selling as well as producing cheese. It's a lot of work. So we started working with an affineur called Marcel Petite, maybe about 24, 25 years ago. And to introduce what Marcel Petite and the significance of it, we'll sort of go back in history again to the origins of Comté. So people started making these large wheels of cheese. So a wheel of cheese now is about 80 pounds, give or take. And they've always been about that size. However, now, when you look at the pace of the Comté, you can tell by the pieces you have, they're smooth throughout. There's no big eyes or big holes. Well, when Comté was made originally, they would be these really sort of big fat wheels, almost like what you would see like Emmental look. And this is because the cheese was being made pretty much only in the summertime for a long time. They were aged in these very high temperature, humid caves where all the gases inside the cheese would basically sort of would puff out and help puff the cheese out. And all of these cheeses were being aged between about 3 to 6 months. The reason they were aged for such a short amount of time is they didn't really have the proper facilities to do it longer than that. People needed to make money, so you got to sell it faster. And two, that's just what everybody knew. Everybody sort of call it tradition or whatever. That's just what it was. So for years, this is the way cheese was made. At that point in time, they called it Gruyère de Comté. And the reason they called it Gruyère is because the Swiss Gruyère already had a better name for itself, had a better following. And so French farmers and producers trying to capitalize on that. Comté comes from the area, it's called Franche-Comté. That's the actual department of the where this is in the Jura. But so it's called Gruyère de Comté for a long time. And so it was very obvious that it was not Gruyère made in Switzerland. However, producers just kept making it. They were making more and more of it. They were shipping it throughout France. It was being used, but it was not really sort of high grade cheese at this point. So a couple things started to happen. One is Comté or Gruyère de Comté became the first AOP cheese in France. In other words, the first government regulated cheese, and all these rules about fruitières and distance between farms, all these things started to come into place. The other thing that started to happen was Gruyère basically, the Swiss mafia, which I've referred to before, the Gruyère mafia, sort of came into place, and they sued the country of France producers and fought for their name to be taken off of the French product. So you take away the name Gruyère de Comté and you're left with a cheese. It has AOP status, yet it's sort of an average cheese at this point. And Marcel Petite, who was at that point, I believe, 4th generation dairyman. His family had at different points made cheese, been farmers, aged cheese, sort of everything. He wanted to grow and change and make Comté a different product, essentially. He wanted to make it better than it was. He was tired of this sort of a second-rate cheese. And walking sort of near where he grew up near a small town called Pontarlier, sort of looking for an ideal spot, somebody introduced him to this old abandoned fort. The fort, which was called Fort Leucotte, was sitting right above this little village called Saint Antoine. And this fort was the same as a series of forts that were built along the French border during the Prussian invasions in the 1870s and 1880s. And this was a fort that had been abandoned by the French after World War II. It was basically an underground armament. I think it held about 420 people holding ammunition and helping serve as a warning. But it was built entirely underground. The only entrance at the point that when Marcel Petite found this was at the very top. There was a small window so that people could sort of look out, and there was a gate facing the western side. Sorry, I had to think about that. The reason that facing the western side is so that the invaders who were coming in from the east wouldn't be able to see it. So this, but it was entirely underground. when I say it's entirely laying the ground, at any point, any between the ground on top and the ceiling underneath, the ceiling of this fort, there was no less than 5 meters of ground of earth. So it was completely buried. Well, somebody showed him this fort, you know, because he started asking around what I want to do this, and realized when he went into it that it was a steady temperature of, I believe, about 8 degrees, or yeah, no, about 11 degrees. I'm sorry. It was humid. There was a little bit of moisture, but it wasn't too bad. And thought to himself, this is where I can age cheese. So that right there that you can see in that photo, that's the entrance into the fort. You can see the ground sitting on top, and then everything else is underneath. So, sorry, underneath, and then keeps going out. I believe that stretches for a while. I don't know the exact size of the fort. Anyway, so when Marcel Petite got this cave and he sort of built it out, like every other affineur and person in the Jura aging cheese, he cut down the trees he's using were spruce trees, sapin in French. And these are the boards. So he gets his boards all set. He puts them in the cave and starts to age his cheese. So, you know, he had to convince farmers that he was going to pay them age their cheese without any idea of what was going to happen in his cave. He knew he could just age it and sell it and see where it was at, but nobody really knew what he was going to sort of stumble upon. So every other cave was warmer, about 16 degrees in Celsius, we're talking. And that's 5 degrees are massive difference. So he had a colder cave, he had a better humidity level. And what immediately started happening with the cheeses that he bought was, instead of them puffing out, they stayed smaller and flatter and started to age more uniform. And with it being more uniform, he began to realize he could age cheese a little bit longer. So the first cheese that we have listed is called Elegance. That's aged about 6 months. So when Marcel Petite started aging cheese, that's a cheese that was 6 months would have been considered old for Comté, right? The Gourmandise, which is aged somewhere in that 10 to 12 month range, would have been unheard of back then. He was the first one to do this. So Marcel Petite started to age these cheeses, and it was this sort of slow process. Obviously, it takes a long time. You know, if you're going to age cheese for a year, it's like wine. It takes so much time to actually know what your final product is going to be. So after several years of doing this and getting better results, you know, farmers, particularly those who really cared, started to search him out so that he could age their cheeses. The renown started to grow. I mean, cheese is obviously a popular thing in France. I believe it was Mitterrand who said, "How do you rule a country with 350 cheeses?" Well, there's something like 1,500 cheeses in France at this point. So it was important. Word started to spread. So all of a sudden, cheese shops in Paris are starting to come to the Jura, to Marcel Petite, to his fort, to buy wheels of cheese from him. So it starts to grow. Eventually, there are other affineurs in the Jura who are starting to do this as well. And honestly, I've been to a couple other affineurs, one of which is another fort. Nothing compares to the temperature of this is still colder, the humidity is still better, and nobody does quite the job that Marcel Petite does. So, but he single-handedly transformed Comté from a sort of everyday whatever cheese to this sort of grand cheese that we know today. And then eventually having these different ages, which I will say Marcel Petite as a company at this point does not use the words. They don't use ages as a way to describe these. They use the word expression. So if you hear me say expression, that's why. It's because to me age has become a little less important in this and that. In other words, the cheese is more important, less than how old it is. So as Marcel Petite starts to do this, starts to become more selective about the farmers he's working with. And so now at this point, Marcel Petite works with 37 different fruitiers for Comté. And they now have 2 facilities. So the fort you see right there, which is still called Fort Leucotte. However, it's just called Fort Saint Antoine at this point. It's how they refer to it. We refer to it that way. Our cheese FSA is Fort Saint Antoine. And it's named after the village. It's a little bit more, it means more to Marcel Petite than Fort Leucotte. They also built a different facility where they could age the lesser expressions of the cheese, because like every affineur, there's better and there's worse, and they recognize it. And their idea is to have a better, to be able to separate the highest quality. So the first 2 cheeses listed, the Elegance and the Gourmandise, are aged in the secondary facility, which is in a little village called La Grange Narbeau. And, you know, the Elegance expression and the Gourmandise these are cheeses that, like everything, is selected that it can only age a certain point, right? The Elegance can't go much past where it is now. Otherwise, the flavors sort of lose. They don't develop. They actually get worse. It diminishes. The Gourmandise is selected because it's a better wheel than the Elegance. They know it can age a little bit longer. There's a little more complexity to it. And so therefore it's going to go a little bit longer. Now, each of these wheels, like everything, can be selected at any sort of point in time. We're talking 4 months for the Elegance. That could be ready to go. It could be as long as 8 months. Who knows? Again, it doesn't, the age is irrelevant as the expression. So it's Elegance is supposed to be, is called this because their feeling on this, and we'll sort of talk about why they go through all this in a second. Their feeling this is it's a simple cheese. It's elegant, it's nice, but it's not overly complicated. They would say that this is probably best for breakfast, best as a snack, and so you can just sort of, you know, take it from there. Is it good now? It's great now. Is it good with the whiskey I'm drinking? It is. It'll be good with your wine. You know, however, you know, people who age this and this is their life have much more specific ideas about when these products should be consumed. And, you know, obviously we respect that and do that. We also know, as they know, that people are going to eat Comté whenever they want, and that's absolutely wonderful. So Marcel Petite, who passed away long ago, I believe in the 80s, passed on the company to his son and now his grandchildren. Lionel is his grandchild, he's a grandchild who's most involved in the day-to-day. And so they're still doing this. So 6 generations in now. But this company has grown, and you know, when I mentioned earlier about how much Comté is being made, well, at Fort Saint Antoine, they have about 100 to 150,000 wheels of Comté at any given point. Now, some of these come in and they call it what they sort of dub as a nursery, is one area where the wheels come in, and this is inside the fort, inside when you're below. And those are wheels that are either being moved or being ready to ship. So some of those are in this nursery area. And then when they go to the nursery area, they're tested as a batch, and a batch is usually about 2 weeks worth of cheese from a specific fruitier. They're going to figure out and decide what quality that cheese is, what expression it's going to be, what cave it's going to go to, and it gets moved from there. So it'll spend about 2 to 3 months, depending on what they have going on inside the cave, inside the nursery, and then get moved. And then it starts its bigger aging process. So as you can see the picture on the left, that's actually one of the chef de caves named Jose, who we do a lot of tastings with. Jose de Silva is walking through part of the cave where there's cheeses on each side. And there are, again, 100 to 150,000 wheels of cheese. There are little chalkboards signifying what fruitier they come from, what the make date is, in other words, what month. All of this is designated, and it sort of goes through there. So they have all of this figured out. At this time of year, as they're ramping up for holiday season, there's about 150,000 wheels. And in this cave, there's probably about, I think they have 8 or 9 different labels that they're going to sell. So Fort Saint Antoine, Lefort, which they call Symphony 16 month, Fort Saint Antoine Reserve, all these different labels that they designate. And so they have very, very specific criteria for each one. Now that sort of leads me to tasting these, the expression of, and actually before we do that, is everybody tasting the cheeses? Everybody's eating them and enjoying them? Thumbs up, anything? I'll take that as a yes for eating the cheeses. So Morgan, can you find a cheese of us tasting, or the slide with Jose tasting? Or is it not coming up?
So what we don't is we
So listen for just a second.
to avoid,
Cheese quarantine.
yeah, but keeping a cheese 24 months and more.
Oh, it's gonna happen.
Will you be at the fancy food show? Yeah?
No. All right. So what was happening right there was we were in the process of selecting wheels of, that would have been FSA or Fort Saint Antoine, which is somewhere between 12 to 14 months, give or take. And what Jose was doing was he's chosen a fruitier. The person who was there with him is a gentleman named Benoit. So they've chosen a fruitier that we either know that we've selected or they like the batch. They go in, we select, we taste these wheels. And so he pulls the wheel out and is tapping it, listening for a couple different things. One, just to make sure that there's no defects in the wheel. And by defect, it's usually a fissure and you can hear it. It's distinct. The other thing he's doing is he is trying to find where he feels the best spot to taste from is. So by tapping around, he can sort of hear. I don't understand exactly what he's listening for. It's very complex. However, you can hear differences in different parts of the wheel. So when he taps around, he finds a spot. He takes, it's called an iron, looks like a T, and he goes and he pulls out this sample and pulls it out. So he does a quick smell, and then we get this little tiny taste. So when I say tiny taste, so when we're eating the cheese here, you've got these nice pieces. Well, basically, like I might get a piece of cheese that, if I'm lucky, if it's that big. So we get to taste the cheese. We sort of feel it a little bit. I usually smell it, but the smell is less to do with it overall. But, sort of get it a little more warm in the hand, then taste it, try to savor a little bit, get the flavors going around the mouth. And then what we're going to do after that is we're going to tell them what we taste, and whether or not we like it. Now, Jose and Benoit are tasting as well, and they have an idea of what it should taste like or what the expressions are in it. So if I sit here and I say, so if everybody wants to grab a piece of the FSA, since that's what we're talking about, for example, I taste this cheese. So a small amount of taste. Now I'm going to sort of spit out a couple things that I think are there. And again, I don't have a second chance to taste. There's only one chance. So in this, I got a little bit of warmed, like it's a scallion to me, but it's been warmed up. It's not super fresh. There's a little bit of fruitiness, sort of borderline. It's almost like a very ripe stone fruit, sort of peach and nectarine. Not floral like those can be, but I get some very ripe fruit in there. It's not sweet, but it's a little fruity. And then I kind of get like a little bit of toasty feeling in this. So I'm going to say this to Jose and Benoit. They're either going to agree or disagree or say, yeah, actually that's there. Then I just have to decide if I like the wheel. However, that wasn't always the case. It used to be a little more strict. We'd have to sort of understand exactly what was going on in each wheel for us to select it. And I'll get to that in just a second because it's a fun story. Anyway, so we select these. So we taste this, and we'll taste, like with Fort Saint Antoine, for example. Jose will have selected 3 different batches for us to try. And I might say, you know what, I want to try one more. And then we'll try one more. He has an idea. The other thing we're doing in the middle of this is, like, for example, we're going to be there in a few weeks. We are choosing wheels for our holiday season. So we are going to have 2 shipments coming in, one that's going to arrive in November, one that's going to arrive in December. And I want to make sure that the wheel of FSA that I choose is going to be good both in November and December. So we might taste the cheese and say, wow, I love the way that one tasted, but is it going to be okay in December, you know, or January, because it'll last into January. And we have to make the decision that yes or no. If Jose says, you know what, it's not going to work, then we choose a different wheel that'll be better later. So within all the middle of this, we're choosing for a season, we're choosing for a couple months down the road. Because these wheels, the other thing is, when we taste this wheel, we expect the wheel to be what we tasted, but also develop slightly differently as it ages. So we have to make sure that we feel it's going to go in the right direction. They do this with us. It's not just me deciding. If Jose and Benoit say that's going to be, we're not going to like that in a month, we're not choosing that wheel. We can love it right now, but if it's not good for later, we're not going to do it. So we are working with Marcel Petite to taste these and select these wheels for Formaggio Kitchen, right? And in the past, we have been very careful to select each of the different ages and expressions we sell, so that there's some familiarity and similarity between year to year. They know our taste, so they tend to work with us on that. I've been going there for 17 years, and a lot of the Comté you guys taste, I will sort of boast and say that it's based on my palate, just because I've been doing this for so long, and and working with them so closely, they know what I like. And so when we choose wheels, it tends to be a lot of what I like. So I hope you guys enjoy it, because if not, I'll blame someone else. But it's always wonderful. So Marcel Petite does this with shops in Paris, other places in Europe, and we are the only Americans who do this selection. So we go once or twice a year to select. We started doing this about 25 years ago, give or take a year or two, when our previous owners, Isan Gerdal and his wife, Valerie, were invited to go to the fort and taste. So back then, when they first went in, and even the first time I went, it was a little bit different how we selected. So back then it was Claude always and Philippe, and Claude he still runs the cave. He's the head of Claude Berry, runs the whole thing, and he knows every single wheel of cheese in there by heart. He knows them up and down. And when you taste with Claude, particularly the first time, he would do the same thing as Jose. You tap, you get your little plug and then taste. And what Claude would do is you would give a taste and he would judge you immediately on what you say. If you were wrong, he would let you know. You know, I always say, and anybody, most people would say this, that taste is very subjective. Well, when it comes to Comté and it comes to Marcel Petite with Claude, it was not subjective. It was his idea, and that's it. So when Isan and Valerie started to taste, for example, they're tasting the wheel. At this point, they were looking to buy one cheese or one age. That's it. Whatever they could get, they weren't going to fight about it. So they get a wheel cheese. It's again that FSA age around 12 months, and they taste it. And at this point, Claude and Philippe will only speak French inside the cave. They refuse to speak English, even though they both could. But they're tasting it, and they say, they do this. They smell it. They talk amongst each other. Then they give Isan, Valerie, and whoever they were with a taste. And Isan says, "I taste hazelnut," for example. Well, Claude looks at him and says, "Okay, where's the hazelnut from? Is it roasted? Is it raw? does it have the skin on it?" Laid out all this criteria. So a single taste, which a lot of Americans, we use nutty as sort of a blanket term. Well, there it wasn't. This is nutty is not a blanket term. You said hazel. He said hazelnut. Hazelnut has a massive meaning, right? There's so many different ways to have hazelnuts. They taste different each way. So Isan and Valerie had to start tasting wheels and deciding what to say and getting a little more specific. For me, when I first started going, I actually went with Isan's son, who was working with us at the time, and we go in and we're tasting, or begin our tasting, and we go to a wheel, and I'm with Claude, and Claude is an intimidating person. He's got that French scowl down perfect, and never smiles. He does now, but when you first know him, he never smiles. And we taste the wheel. He does the whole thing, and either Kurt or myself, and I want to say it's Kurt, but I don't know, tastes it and says, "I taste strawberry." And Claude looks at us. He says, "No." He plugs the wheel back in, puts it away, and we walked away. So it didn't matter if we liked it. Didn't matter if anything. We didn't understand what was happening with that wheel. So therefore, we were not going to be able to buy it or purchase it. And you know what? At this point in time, I respect them for it. I understand. They want us to represent what they do to the fullest extent. And so I get it. That's fine. So again, like Isan had to learn, I had to learn the same thing. Parse your words, be careful, think about it first. You're going to be wrong sometimes. I mean, it's palates are subjective and we have to be careful. However, the relationship has worked and it's worked since then. And I've certainly learned how to, taste Comté and say the right words, and understand it a hell of a lot better than I did. But from that first meeting with Comté, where Marcel Petite was generous enough to say that you guys are okay, we're going to sell you some cheese, where I believe they bought and imported 2 wheels. We now not only carry up to 7 different expressions at one point. There's a younger one that's a culinary wheel that they call Trois Sapin, which is not here. And in November, we will bring in our what we call Extra Grand Cru, which is aged for over 30 months, which we get 7 wheels of those a year. But we bring in, we're the largest shop or largest importer as a shop in the US. We sell more Comté than anybody in the US minus Costco, believe it or not. And I think there's another, it's either Walmart or somebody else who sells Comté. Although most people wouldn't know it, it's not always given a Comté label. It's often called something else. And that is because Comté, right? We're having all these different wonderful Comtés. Comté is graded on a 14 to 20 or 0 to 20 point scale. And the Comté that we bring in, minus a Trois Sapin, and most of the Comté you'll see in the US all has a score between 14 and 20 and has a green label. Anything below that has a brown label. And if the score is 10 or below, it can't be designated as Comté. It doesn't get the label and it's sold as something different. However, it's still Comté. And so they still designate it as a Comté sale. So what you're tasting has all been graded as 14 to 20. What they are specifically and individually, I don't know. Marcel Petite doesn't care. They just want to make sure they get the green label. That's what their concern is. It's money for them. It's money for the fruitier. It's more money for the farmer. And again, like I said in the beginning, it's all symbiotic, and everything sort of works together. So I have given you a ton of information. I'm sure there's questions. The one last thing that I want to sort of discuss before I do take any questions is all these different flavors. And I talked about fruitiers and the names of them. What I did not say, and which is very important, is that each of these batches comes from a very specific time of year. And the time of year, the month it is, has a huge factor in what the flavor of this cheese is going to be, and just the environment as a whole. So the wheel that she's showing is what's called the flavor wheel, the Comté flavor wheel. There are, I believe, about 116 flavors listed there. And these are the words that we use to describe Comté when we're in the cave. There's everything from vegetal to, fruit in there. There's all sorts of things. And there's so many different ways to describe it. But so most of when we get the wheels of FSA, for example, those are aged about 12 months. Well, most of the wheels that we're selecting were made between May and June. The wheels of Lafort, which is aged about anywhere between 16 to 18, maybe a little more. Again, we're looking at June, July, maybe August, depending on the year. The lesser wheels can be any time. For some reason, December has become a popular popular month for the gourmandise. So, but each of these months are very important. So, if you want to know what weather has as a factor, terroir means for cheese. Terroir meaning the taste of the land. In this, is that during these times of year, the weather's different, which means the feed is different, the grass is different. During the spring months, May, this is a time of year where the grasses are sort of coming to life, and so they've put more energy into simply starting to grow, becoming greener. They're super high in nutrients. The rainy season hasn't hit yet. If you get into August and it's too rainy, well, now the grass becomes waterlogged, and that's going to affect the flavor. Are the dandelions blooming? Because the cows are going to eat dandelions. Is that going to bring in, are the leaves too big? Are they going to bring in a bitter flavor? Is this? And the wheels of cheese that we're selecting come from specific times of year for that reason, because Marcel Petite feels that the best qualities are from these times of year. And if it's too hot, that affects it. If it's too cold, that affects it, because again, everything it's grass and when they're outside, it's hay when they're inside. And if one factor changes the way this feed is, it's going to affect the milk. And so it's very, very important for all of these that they come from the right time of year. That doesn't mean that you can't get quality from a different time. But it's more than likely that that's when it's coming from. Now, again, I threw out so much information. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Does anybody have any questions? Was I not clear? What can I tell you to help, make this a little more memorable and interesting for you guys? Because there's so many things happening.
So yeah, I have a question here. So were all the cheeses were they from different companies or were they from the same companies? I understand that it's from different farms and it's stored at these central places and so on, but could you just clarify that because I didn't totally follow?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So it's actually the answer to that is it's all of that. So we get all of our Comté from Marcel Petite, and that's again the affineur. All Marcel Petite does is aged cheese. They do nothing else. Marcel Petite works with 37 different fruitières, and of what we tasted here, there were 4 different fruitières, and that's the fruitières where the cheese is made. The Grand Cru, the 5th cheese in this, and the FSA are from the same farm, different times a year and age a little bit differently. So they are going to taste entirely different. So it's we're buying from one person, but each of these cheeses can come from different fruitières. So the expression can always be a little bit different. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense. Can I
Perfect.
take one more question?
Yeah, of course. Go.
Yeah, so you said you selected certain times of the year to get what you're looking for. So what is it about? Well, what times of the year is it, and why does that produce the flavor you like?
So what I've learned, and this is from tasting hundreds of wheels in the cave at Marcel Petite, is that the quality of the milk and the flavors that it's producing seem to be at their peak during these times, right? So what I've learned that I love, I've learned this almost every time I go and I taste cheeses. I tend to really like cheeses that are made in the fall. It took me a long time to understand this. So when I say fall, these are sometimes September, but generally October, and end of September, going into the beginning of November, but usually October to September, the sweet spot. And what I realized that I like about this is that the wheels that are made at that time, they have, I like the flavor of what the grass is after it's been warmed in the sun. I like the fall flowers that they're eating. To me, they seem to be a little more robust and have a little bit more savory quality to them. It doesn't mean that they're really big flavored or super strong, but the flavors to me seem to be a little more pronounced. Whereas I find with the spring cheeses, spring Comté, I tend to find that they are sometimes the flavors are a little more subtle. And I like that sort of a little bit more robust flavor going on with. Now, when we taste in a few weeks, I may change my mind entirely and like, one from the spring better. It's just, again, it's just simply just, I've had the luck of tasting wheel after wheel after wheel of these cheeses. And so I know what I like, but it's, you can't always pinpoint exactly because every now and then they throw a curveball into what we're tasting and it sort of throws everything off and that becomes a favorite. So I'm generalizing with myself, but that's the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah, thank you. Is this, and then this is a rule that you have come up, that you have found out
Kind of,
to be true for Comté?
Right.
And
But if we do this tasting in a year, I might have decided that I've changed my mind on that and I like the others, a different style better. So, I have the right to change my mind. All right. Do we have any other questions? We're sort of getting toward the end of the time here. Now, did everybody like the cheeses, or are we happy with these? Again, these are some of my favorite cheeses. I couldn't live without them, so I hope everybody feels the same way as I do. Good. Well, again, thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the, I guess summer's over, but I guess technical summer. But I hope you guys enjoy yourselves. Thank you guys so much. And we will see you all in about a month.